All right, Don. So here's first of all, by the way, nice cameo in Last Dance.
Yeah.
I could see you were. I was amazing. Good head of hair, and that was. I looked up. You had like 18 a game that year, huh?
No, I think that was my rookie year was
Oh,
the
okay.
Bradford Smith
Oh,
game.
okay.
That's why I was on the end of the bench where you saw me on the end of the bench, Ted. You're one of three people that picked me out. But
Oh no, no. Well, I
yeah, that
remember.
was my rookie year, which I didn't play a lot. I was the king of the fourth quarter that year, though, because we weren't very good. And so we'd be down 25 heading into the fourth of most games. And I'd come in just gunslinging, looking to score. And I actually had a few big fourth quarters that season in meaningless games because we were
Yeah.
losing.
So 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 I was in the NBA before you because of my age, but I was a young guy, and what I remember vividly was that and a guy that was in the Last Dance a little bit, Johnny Bach, went on to become a really successful assistant coach in the early Jordan years. He was Doug Collins' right hand guy.
Mhm.
Johnny was the head coach, and Johnny would preach to me 10th, 11th, 12th guys. Look, I don't care if they play because they're not gonna. They better practice.
Right.
They better practice. I remember that. Now that's another era in the NBA. But I want. Did you live through some of that?
Yeah, I mean, Wes Unseld was my coach, and he's an old school guy. And it was understood that unless it was a blowout, I probably wasn't going to play. But I was actually okay with that, and I look forward to practice because to me, that rookie season was about establishing who you can be, and it's a lot of trial and error. Like, can you score like you did in college? Are you going to be able to rebound? Are you going to be able to defend? And so a lot of that's done in practice. But I do believe that those fourth quarters that I played in were a big reason why I was able to come back my second year and have such a good year because I had the confidence and the experience, even though they were meaningless games, of kind of how I could be and how I could score. And it turned out that even though I started most of that second year through trial and error, through games played, it turns out that my best position was going to be like a six-man scoring type. I
Mm.
just wasn't good enough defensively to start. So bring me off the bench, hopefully get a better matchup with the other team's second unit and score. And that's kind of what I did when I wasn't hurt all the time.
Oh, and that's a great point because look how many people have made themselves great. I mean, Jamal Crawford. I'm trying to think of the guy. How many years did Jamal Crawford play in the league? Right, being that kind of guy.
Yeah, Lou Williams, same thing. There's a lot of guys. If you accept the role, which I did, because it was easier in the first guy that really turned me on to it was Bernie Bickerstaff. When I got traded there to Denver my fourth year, right before the start of my fourth year, I was already kind of thinking that like that's kind of who I'm probably going to have to be, which I was fine with. But Bernie said, "Look, I want you to be the sixth man. We're going to run plays for you, and you're going to score. Don't worry about anything else." And that's when it really hit home that that's how people view me, and that I've been starting to think that way. And then it just got kind of hammered home.
It's funny. I'm thinking of another guy now that I actually crossed paths with that you played against. I was in Charlotte for 1 year, and Muggsy Bogues and Rex Chapman were the starting guards.
Mm-hmm.
But the sixth man was Dell Curry.
Yeah.
And Dell Curry's another. I mean, you forget this now because of the son, obviously, but Dell Curry, a tremendous career, right? Long careers, that kind of guy coming off the bench who could shoot.
Yeah, and people obviously now talk about Steph, but I'll stand by this because I know because I guarded them.
Mm-hmm.
Dell Curry has the quickest release in the history of the NBA,
Ooh,
and
wow.
that's coming from a guy who had a pretty quick release as well.
Yeah.
So no understanding that I had a well above average in terms of how to catch and get it away quick. His was even faster, and I was fascinated by it, how he could get it from the catch to the shooting pocket that and away that fast. It was staggering. And people don't, I mean, why would they? Because Steph is, done way more than Dell ever did. But I will stand by that Dell Curry has the quickest release in the history of the game.
So can you teach something like that, Don? Or is there a genetic passage from that from Dell to Steph?
There might be hand-eye has something to do with it because you have to be able to get the ball, like I said, catch it and get it to the right spot fast, and then be confident enough to let it go. But the ball placement has to be right every time. Like it has to sit in the same spot. So like it doesn't do you any good to catch it quick, get it here quick if the ball's moving around or is in a different
Yeah.
spot. to get it away, because then it comes off weird. So it can be taught, but it has to be repped out like a bazillion times.
Yeah.
Like to where you're so confident that you can shoot it faster and still believe that it's going to go in.
So all right, we're going to go inside shooting just for a minute here. See, this is free form. When you just did that with your hands, it made me think of something, because I spent so many years watching and learning how baseball pitchers could instinctively grab a ball. Even players, infielders, if they had to throw, could instinctively grab a ball and get the seams right so that they threw the ball the way they wanted to, straight or with movement, depending on a pitcher. Anyway, the point is, as a shooter, could you do that? Did you instinctively find seams?
Yeah, lace it up. And if you talk to people about shooting that understand shooting, guys just don't lace it anymore like they used to. Like I couldn't imagine shooting a basketball without lacing it. But that's something, along with getting it away quickly, is it becomes instinctive through a bazillion reps of it. Where if you threw me a ball right now, Ted, and said, okay, Don, you're going to shoot a free throw even, I would instinctively lace it up.
Yeah.
So where the laces are straight and forward, not.
Sure. But could you do that on the fly? Could you instinctively do that on? Yeah, as I'm saying, because baseball players, I learned, the major leaguers could do that on the fly.
Yeah. No. I don't think I ever shot a basketball in a game like a jump shot. Now, if it's like a jump hook or something in the paint, yeah, you'll just flip it up there. But a jump shot, catch and shoot, I don't think I ever shot a shot where it wasn't laced. Wow. I'm going to say from high school on.
Okay. See, that's great. That's inside shooting. And I never thought about that as much in basketball until you did that motion with your hands.
And you know what's funny is and I haven't asked enough people to know why or understand why, but as time has gone on, if you see a guy that laces it now, it's abnormal. Whereas when I played, all good shooters probably laced it. But you just don't see it. Like J.J. Redick doesn't lace it, interestingly enough. Like he's one of the great shooters in the game right now. And you'll see there's lots of guys that don't. And I think it's just gone away from, guys teach themselves how to shoot now, playing pickup or whatever. There's not as much instruction as there used to be, maybe not as much summer basketball camps where you would teach something like that. But it is fascinating to me that there are obviously a ton of great shooters in the league and in college now that don't lace the ball, which I couldn't imagine that.
Yeah. All right. That's good stuff. I don't want to drag this and drag you out too long. So I want to get swinging into more what we've been dealing with lately. I think this is to me, it's the most overlooked part of what we've gone through now in this pandemic, as it applies to college basketball. And again, we're out of season. But because of when this struck in the middle of conference tournaments, there were a handful of conference tournaments that finished, but just a handful. Most hadn't. Therefore, most schools hadn't finished their seasons. By my look, since the day that the world stopped, in Division I college basketball, there have been 2 coaching changes. 2. Green Bay let their coach go this week. And about a month ago, which, again, no one pays attention to, Danny Manning got let go at Wake Forest.
Saw that.
2. So the total number, because some schools made changes before the pandemic struck, some schools had finished their seasons before the pandemic started, it's 23. Last year, it was almost 60. So shockingly to me, job security in a time of massive unemployment, right? It's crazy to think that in the Power 5 conferences, Danny Manning's the only coaching change. It's mind-blowing.
I can venture a guess at that, Ted, and you know what it comes down to is money and how much money was lost with no conference tournaments being finished, no NCAA tournament. What are Power 5 coaches' buyouts? I think institutions I think this is going to go on for a while.
Yeah.
Hopefully we have football in the fall or at some point, or it's really going to get ugly financially. But I just think that's probably why. Whether guys were going to get fired or not, we don't know. But if it was gray area or we're not sure, we're keeping them around. We can't afford to pay, buyouts. And just the economic impact of this and what it did at the end of spring, middle of spring, end of spring, is probably why there haven't been much movement in that regard.
Yeah, it hits me, Don, because I've thought this in football, that the arms race in college football, we've seen, I've seen it over decades morph into various forms. And lately it's morphed into coaching salaries for coordinators.
Mm-hmm.
Now the coordinators at top schools can make 7-figure salaries. And that's what I think is done coming out of this. That to me won't happen. I don't know if there's a translation, do you think, into college basketball on that front?
I think, look, no one knows the answer to that. We don't know what the economic fallout's going to be across the board, but I have a feeling this is all going to look different. I have a feeling that there's not going to be any more $40 million head coaches in basketball. I don't think there's going to be, and I think it just all trickles down, Ted, as you know. If there's no more $40 million head coaches, then there's probably no more $1 million assistant coaches or 750 or whatever the number is, until there's a couple cycles back through this, couple more NCAA tournaments. Like I think this is going to push some of this stuff out a couple years until they can all recover from this, and who knows how long that's going to take. But I do think that what you're saying is correct, and that this will trickle down, and that we're not going to see what we've seen for the last 5 years. We're probably not going to see for another 5 years at least, I would bet. And
so here's something you have a firsthand touch on, because you work this time of year. Normally you work to prepare players for the draft.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, and again, it's both football and basketball. So let's talk the basketball side. We've seen players in the pack, McKinley Wright, Timmy Allen, Booth Gotch, and I'm sure there are others that I'm not thinking off the top of my head who've put their name into the draft process for right now. But does the uncertainty, and I'm wondering about this, does that uncertainty of where college athletics will go change the viewpoint that, hey, even if I'm not going to make the NBA, I'm going to go play somewhere and get paid next year?
It's a tough one, Ted, because you can't go back. You can put your name in, and then June 3rd, they're going to have to move that date because they're probably going to move the draft back. But once you stay in, you can't, it's over. You're a pro now.
Right.
And so that's a tough one, because we don't know what college basketball is going to look like. It doesn't start, games don't start till late October, early November. So what's the country going to look like by then? It would be a mistake, though, I think, to give up your eligibility, because maybe the college game is going to look a little different, maybe with less fans. But that doesn't change the NBA's evaluation of you as a player. Like, just because the landscape looks different and games might look different, they're still evaluating you as a player. And so if you do go pro early and you say, well, I think college isn't going to be great next year, so I don't care. Even if I don't get drafted, even if I don't play in the NBA, I can go somewhere and play for money. That's a long road if you think you are an NBA player at some point. Once you don't get drafted by the NBA, it is a tough, tough road to get back to the NBA.
And that's a great call, Don. That's why I wanted to go through this with you from your experiences. So here's a player, another guy that's put his name in for now. We saw him play a lot near the end of the year. I think we talked about this off air, was Terrell Terry at Stanford. A very talented kid who played better to me as the year went along, carried an immense burden for his team. Physically not there yet, right? Physically not there yet. Does the NBA, is there a trend starting to draft futures where I'm going to draft you even though I don't need you to play for 2 years?
No, in fact, that's completely flipped around. It used to be that way, especially with big guys.
Well, Popovich did this in San Antonio a couple of times too, didn't he?
Right. But it depends.
Murray.
I shouldn't say it's not across the board. There are some franchises that operate a little bit differently, but I would say in general that's changed. That these teams want help now. They're not drafting guys, and that's why you see so many 4-year guys going in the first round, where that used to be like taboo 5 years ago, where if you were a 4-year guy, something's wrong with you, you're not good enough, so we're going to take you in the second round or not draft you at all. Now teams are saying, okay, who can help me right now? And the perfect example is Matisse Thybulle, 21st pick in the draft. Why? Because he's our starting wing defender right now with the guys that we have. And so for a guy like Terrell Terry, who, is an NBA player at some point, I don't think a team's going to take him in the first round knowing that he's probably not going to help them right away. Okay. And I think he's a first-round draft pick at some point. Maybe it's after next year. But if I were advising Terrell Terry, and I've been doing this a long time, Ted, I've been doing pre-draft for 15, 16 years, so I've seen them all. I would advise Terrell Terry to go back for 1 year, work on his body, expand on what he did his freshman year, and he would, I would say, no doubt, be a first-round pick next year.
The experience, I want to come back to in a second. What would you tell McKinley Wright?
I would tell McKinley Wright, he's a tough one because I think he's near a ceiling. Yeah. The one thing that he could do, and we've seen this in the past, is if Colorado had a really, really good year next year and he was the catalyst for that, i.e. Peyton Pritchard this year, that could really help himself. The shooting is still an issue. I know he works hard at it, but it still hasn't translated all the way. Like and he would start out as a backup point guard in the league, you have to be able to knock down a shot. And so if he could come back next year and improve, he improved this year, but if he could come back next year and be much more improved, and this is how I know, guy I played with, Ted, that you'll remember, almost exactly like McKinley Wright. Really good player, really good setup guy, great playmaker, but couldn't consistently make a shot. Senior year comes back and shoots over 40 from the three-point line, went 10th in the draft. Pooh Richardson, same guy.
Wow.
And I don't know where he was slotted to go, but I know it wasn't 10th in the draft. And the reason he did is because he proved to scouts that he could make a three-point shot. And I think that's the same thing for McKinley. Would he get drafted this year if he stays in? I think he might, mid-second round, something like that. But like Terry, I think if he proves he can shoot, he's a first-round pick.
Well, that's a great memory call on Pooh Richardson. Wow. Yeah. And you overlapped probably 1 year, right?
I played with him that senior year.
Yeah, right. I was going to say. Yeah. God. The experience thing, Don, that strikes me because I heard Steve Kerr, and he talked about this recently, and he used the Matisse Thybulle analogy you used. He used it for Draymond Green.
Yeah.
I played 4 years, and then he even said Curry played 3, but really used Green as the example. And Kerr said in the way the Warriors are looking and evaluating college players, they are really relishing the experience. Now, they have exceptions. They drafted Looney after 1 year at UCLA, and it took him a while. He was, in essence, a futures pick.
Mm-hmm.
But I love the fact he pointed out Draymond Green the same way you talked about Thybulle.
Well, and I think they're specialists too. That's become different as well. Like if you're like Thybulle is a specialist. He's not. I think he'll evolve into a reliable three-point shooter, 3-and-D guy they call him. But he's a specialist defensively, and I think Draymond was the same way. So they're looking at their roster, saying, okay, what do we need to get better? Do we need a big? Do we need this? Do we need perimeter shooting? And there's guys that are veteran players in college that you look at and you say, okay, that will translate, and that specialist is what we need on our roster now. And that's why you see guys get drafted sometimes that don't have gaudy numbers, like Thybulle, but are specialists, and teams feel like they can plug into what they already have.
Yeah. Is it still, Don, do you think, going to stay the point that you can't play in the NBA without being able to shoot?
I mean, there's exceptions, but it's way more than it's ever been, Ted. Like, you really need to be able to shoot. Like Montrezl Harrell comes to mind. He never shoots perimeter shots, but he's got a +1 motor and a unique skill set that allows him to not have to shoot. But yeah, if you're, there's some exceptions at the 5 position, even though they don't call it the 5 anymore, but bigs, there's some exceptions there. But if you're a wing player or a guard, yeah, you pretty much have to be able to shoot, because the difference in what's changed is NBA defenses have become so much more sophisticated that they'll just leave you alone. They can do that. That's how good defenses are, that they can literally guard 5-on-4 and leave you open, strategically. Doesn't happen as much in the regular season, but once you get to the playoffs, you see it all the time. And that's probably a team that I've covered forever, the Clippers. That's why they didn't advance. They had DeAndre Jordan, Blake Griffin, and Chris Paul, but they could never find a 3-and-D guy that, when left open in the playoffs, could consistently make a shot.
Yeah. Good. That's a good point. I'm thinking, as you say that, leaving people alone, how the NBA has changed over the years, and back again in the 80s, the era you were still playing in school. I think it was Bill Fitch was the first one to do this, to isolate. He would send 2 players and go over. You guys go over, and when we have the ball, you 2 go over and stand basically in the first row. Go over and stand in the Spike Lee seats because they had to take 2 defenders with them. Back then, you couldn't play zone in the league. So you could play, and that way you could play 3-on-3. And I think that was one of the real impetus for the league to allow some semblance of zone defense. I'm pretty sure Fitch was the guy that did that would just turn the game into 3-on-3, and it was basically horrible to watch.
Yeah, that was still around when I came into the league. The straight ISO plays, clear aside. But you're right. That's kind of what brought the zone into it, was to allow teams to not have to, lift guys up high on the opposite side. And that was a great move, whoever's decision that was, because the game now, when the ball's moving and guys are involved 5-on-5 is great to watch. And yeah, it was great to watch great isolation players like Jordan and Barkley and Olajuwon and all those guys. But I think overall the game wasn't as fascinating as it is now. It was like, okay, Olajuwon's great. They're going to throw it into him 30 times a game, and he's either going to score or the other team's going to decide to double him, and he's going to throw it out. And let's see if the guy can make an opposite wing jumper. That's what the game was. When I first came in the league, that's all it was ISO post. Yeah. And then other team decides to double or not. And if you do, you throw it opposite. That guy shoots the 3 in the slot on the wing, or he passes it one more to the corner. That was the entire offense.
I'm laughing, Don, because I'm watching, and I was watching the Last Dance episode with the Pacers against the Bulls in the finals. And I just shouted at my wife because there was a play where they just threw the ball into Rick Smits, who backed the defender. I forget which Bulls defender. He just dribbled.
Yeah.
5-6 pounds, backed the guy in, turns and shoots. And I'm going, God, that wasn't that long ago, but now it looks like prehistoric basketball.
Yeah, you don't see that ever anymore. And what's interesting about that is teams like the Pacers and the teams that had a chance to win it all were always looking for shooting, because guys like Smits commanded a double team. So you had to have shooting on the opposite side if they did double. But what's interesting about that play, and I know which play you're talking about, is the great teams that do have a chance think they're good enough defensively individually to have to double.
Right.
Like, we have a guy that can guard Rick Smits, so we can stay at home and stay attached on the opposite side. And that cat and mouse game was always interesting to watch on, does this team have a guy that can guard, Smits or Barkley or whoever in the post? And if they do, they don't have to double. What does that do to the other guys? And, from that standpoint, it seems like the game was simpler back then. It just wasn't as good. It's like there's way more strategy now, way more rules and just more involvement from everybody, which I think makes it better.
And I don't want to in any way, because we're going way off the reservation here, but I don't want to denigrate college basketball at all. It's not my point, because it's the pros is their livelihood. But Mike Montgomery, who we all know well as a colleague, he's been a friend for a long time. Mike had a 2-year run in the NBA. And after, he admitted to me that the biggest thing he was unprepared for, and he didn't realize it, until he got involved, and then he realized how much it was different in the NBA, was the last 2 minutes. And it was everything you just talked about, the strategy, the tactics, that you just don't have it at the same level in the college game.
Yeah, and some of the rules, and I've been beating the drum, whoever will listen, that if we could advance the ball in the college game, I think it would, on a timeout in the last 2 minutes, that to me would make it way more interesting at the end of game. But yeah, with all the timeouts the NBA has in the strategy and the balanced rosters, I think that's the biggest thing. It's like these coaches on the good teams have not only a play for whatever situation they're in, but a lineup for whatever situation they're in. And so, yeah, it's way more detailed, way more strategy, because NBA coaches have more stuff at their fingertips. And to me, the biggest one is advancing the ball.
Yeah.
So you don't have to waste that time dribbling it up the court. If it's, 4.2 seconds, that's an hour and a half court set out of a sideline or baseline out of bounds.
Would that be the first rule you change in college if you could?
Oh, I'd have to think about it. That just came to mind because you said last 2 minutes, but that is one of the major ones that I would change. I just, why not? What's the harm in it if it makes the game more exciting?
Yeah.
Not that the college game isn't exciting, but to me, it just seems like a simple ad. and don't get me started, Ted, with the rules committee, but if you're adding flopping and you're adding all this other stuff that really doesn't make any sense, why don't we add a rule that would actually affect the game, and to me, in a positive way?
Amen. Amen. Well, I'm with you. Trust me. There are about 5 things I would, if I could do the magic wand thing, 1-on-1 foul shooting would be another one I never have understood. I mean, it's illogical, but that's another story. There's something else I saved here to ask you about. I saw this was probably 3-4 weeks ago. 247 Sports put out a chart of where college basketball, this was the signing period for college, and where the best players were coming from. And again, this is something you're involved with. You're the dad of high school basketball players yourself. I'm looking at this here. The most players, the most 4- and 5-star recruits in America this year, California, 14. Georgia had 11, was second most. So it's amazing to me. I mean, that tells me, right? There's still basketball players in California. There's basketball. I mean, we know Seattle has players. There's basketball players in the West, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it cycles to a certain degree, Ted. I don't think it's always every year like that, but certainly LA, Atlanta, Memphis, Chicago, those have kind of always been the hotbeds.
Yeah.
But yeah, the AAU circuit out here is still really strong, and a lot of teams want to come to LA to play. There's a lot of tournaments out here. There's been AAU programs that have been around for a while, the Compton Magic being one of them, that have just sustained, and so they attract players from different places to come play for them. Minnesota's coming on in that regard. In terms of players, we saw a couple, Terrell Terry, Zeke Naji this year at Arizona from Minnesota. So, yeah, I think LA high school basketball is still strong. I don't think every year they have the most, but I'm not surprised by that, what you just read.
Yeah. So just give me your view. Do you think that's an omen? Are things on an upturn potentially for the Pac because there are players that can stay West?
Let's hope so. I mean, the problem is, like football, as Clemson and Alabama come out here and they're taking the top guys back with them. Are we keeping these players from going to Duke and Kentucky and Kansas and the teams that have really recruited well the last 5 to 10 years? It's interesting, this kid, Johnny Juzang, that went to Kentucky from Southern California, transferred back and is now going to UCLA.
Yeah.
So probably should have went to UCLA in the first place. And that's what I hope starts happening more, Ted. The players understand that just because Kentucky and Duke, who, again, it's probably really flattering to get recruited by John Calipari or Mike Krzyzewski, but make the right decision. Just because Kentucky's offering you or Duke's offering you or Kansas is offering you doesn't mean that's the best place for you. Yes, it's flattering, but what's the best place for you?
And that's, I'm sort of implying, coming out of this pandemic, in whatever way we do travel, being away, distance isn't going to be. And I heard I forget which coach, I heard a coach reference this the other day, and it was so smart because we're talking about safety and players. And remember, in college athletics, players are attached to parents and families, right? Is a family going to be more comfortable with their son, in this case, staying home or closer to home, as opposed to going 2/3 of the way across the country?
Well, here's how I know you're right, Ted. My wife has been way more involved than me and my son Kyle, who we've talked about, in the college selection process. And she got educated on it all. And then when this pandemic hit, she's on all these blogs and all these forums, and moms talk about what's happening and who's going where and all this. And it's crystal clear that way less kids are going to go out of state. And it's crystal clear there's way less kids aren't going to be coming from international countries. And so does that mirror what athletics is going to look like? I have a feeling it is. I have a feeling that if I'm choosing between UCLA and Arizona and all things are equal, and I'm from LA, I'm probably just going to stay in LA. Mm-hmm. I have a feeling that's going to, maybe not forever, but I think for at least a couple of years.
Yeah, and I'm not in that. I'm past that point, but I can totally understand that. All right, a couple quick things because I don't want this to drag too long. This whole G League concept. I just wanted to touch base with you on that. Where we've already seen a few players that have chosen to go that route, and I think there was an upside of 500,000. I believe is the number I've heard for
Yeah.
1 year.
Yeah.
Special teams. Sam Mitchell, I heard former Timberwolf is going to coach it. How legit do you think this is going forward in terms of what we've just talked about, the top players choosing that route rather than college?
I think it's legit, and they were smart, the G League was, to have their first player signed for $500,000 because now everyone thinks they're getting $500,000, which isn't the case.
It's not automatic, right? Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And so I think it's going to be a case-by-case basis. You know, there are some families that still, even though it's not talked about, that parents want their kid to start the meter running on their college education. So it's important for them, even if they are a one and done, to go for a year and start it and at least be somewhere so that at some point you can go back and get your degree. And then financially for families, some families really struggle. And even if the kid's only being offered, let's say 200,000, I say only because you could make 500. If you're being offered 200,000, that could be a windfall for some families. So I do think it's a real thing. I don't think it's going to have a complete fallout right away, but I do think there'll be a handful of kids every year that will decide to do that.
Coming out of this, Don, do you think there's any chance the NBA will fight? Because again, fans, I think the general fan doesn't understand that the one and done is not a college basketball rule.
No,
it's an NBA rule,
yeah.
Right? It's 100% the NBA. And so my question is, coming out of this, could that be something that finally prompts the NBA to change and reevaluate that?
Yeah, I think they've been talking about it already. I think this G League transition thing will help with that as well, because they can put them there now. You know, like if I say, okay, we eliminate, you have to go to college or be 1 year removed from high school, we eliminate that, and a kid doesn't go to college and enters the draft and doesn't get drafted, at least now he has the G League. He has the G League as a backstop, whereas in the past you'd have to, you know, go find somewhere overseas or something like that. But I do think that eventually they're going to get rid of the one and done rule.
Good. All right, we're going to wrap this up. I'm going to borrow from our good friend Mike Yam. It's Don's story time. So I had no idea until I saw The Last Dance and saw you sitting on the Washington bench. I did not know the LaBradford Smith story. Didn't know it. Knew him as a terrific college player. What do you remember about that LaBradford Smith game or games, I should say, the couple of games that were documented?
Well, you have to understand, which everybody I think gets now, even if you weren't a fan and watching The Last Dance, just how gigantic Jordan and the Bulls were by then. And we weren't good. It was my rookie year. I think we won like 22 games that year total. And LaBradford was having an okay year, but he wasn't like, you know, on the verge of an all-star game or anything. And so I think the most surprising for everybody was that he got 37 in Chicago Stadium. Like, where'd that come from, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And LaBradford, who I hung out with a decent amount, he wasn't a big trash talker. He wasn't getting after guys. And so when I heard what he had said to him, I'm like, man, that seems kind of out of character. So anyways, we fly back to DC, and the next night the game's at the Cap Center, and I walked in the building, and one of the security guards who I knew, who was there for every home game, said, "You guys are going to be in for a long night." And I said, you know, I'm like thinking, yeah, it's the Bulls. I know we're going to be in for a long night. He's like, "Jordan's been here since 4:00. And he had been. And so we get to the game, and if you played against the Bulls enough in Jordan, and I was always on not so great teams, so we never knew if we got their best shot or not. But I'll never forget that night when and you see it a little bit in The Last Dance, how he narrows his eyes. When he narrows his eyes, you better look out, coming. And from warm-ups on, those eyes were narrow. And so right from the jump, you're like, uh-oh. And sure enough, LaBradford had 37 in the game the night before, Jordan 36 in the first half.
The first half. Are you a good poker player?
We played different games. Poker wasn't big back then. We played like 3-card guts and in between, and just straight gambling games with no strategy, just luck.
I'm just asking because the way you described Jordan's eyes, that's a tell.
Yeah.
You're reading a poker player. That's really good.
But the problem is with his poker tell of narrowing of the eyes, you couldn't do anything about it.
It didn't matter. I think I've said this to you before. My first year in the NBA was the year before Jordan was drafted. And the one game, I was with the Golden State Warriors, the one game we played in Chicago that year, you only played once in the East, at the old Chicago Stadium, maybe 3,000 people.
Really?
I had two college friends who lived in Chicago that came down and sat with me on press row while I was broadcasting the game back to San Francisco. That's how dead the place was the year before Jordan. And that's the context. Whenever I see these things, I always remind myself, that's what Jordan meant to the Chicago Bulls.
I mean, I don't know how many times, and I didn't know a lot of people in Chicago, but knew a few from college or whatever. And you got 2 tickets back then, and that was all you were getting, versus you go to Milwaukee and I needed 20. No problem.
No problem. Hey, listen, man, I'm glad that Kyle's made his decision, and you've got a gaucho in the family.
Yeah, he's happy about it. It's an hour and change away from our house. It turns out that's kind of where he always wanted to go, and he's going to be part of the team with Joe Pasternak, our old buddy Roxy Bernstein's brother-in-law, who's the head coach at Santa Barbara. So I think it's a great situation all the way around for him, and he's really happy about it. So I'm happy for him.
Good. All right, Don. Thanks. Congratulations.
Thanks, Ted.